and the title of my speech is Russia, the craziest place on earth. So, to start, does anyone know any good Soviet Russia jokes? Or have you guys ever heard a Soviet Russia joke? Way too many, right. So, I mean, the general gist of those, sorry, I don't know any to start with, but the general gist of those is that it's a really extreme place, right? So, that's kind of the gist you get. And Russia actually is a very, very extreme place that I'm going to actually be talking with you about today. So, first I'm going to go over some general background and a brief history of Russia. Second, who the current leadership in Russia is. And finally, the current issues in Russia. So to start, according to the BBC as well as the CIA World Factbook, the full name of Russia is the Russian Federation and the capital is Moscow. Some of its main exports do include chemicals, metals, natural gas, petroleum and oil products, and military equipment and weapons. The last two are actually very important because what we see with Russia is that their GDP generally correlates directly with their oil exports. The reason for that is that that's kind of like what they're most dependent on in terms of their economic growth right now. So if oil prices kind of like rise, then they're in a good place. If they start to drop, what we see is that there's a correlation between that dropping and their GDP dropping, and what we actually see is that it's dropped by like 4% in the past year because prices of oil have gone down. Military equipment and weapons, why that's important, we'll actually get to in the third point. So, to go on to the brief history, right? There are a few key, mostly wars that have happened in Russia that kind of led them to where they are today. So the first set of wars was actually the Russian Revolution. There were two battles fought, the February Revolution and the October Revolution. So in the February Revolution, what actually wound up happening was they overthrew the autocracy, right? They kind of had like an emperor, a czar, and they're like, we're kind of tired of this, you're not treating us well. They rebelled against that and set up a provisional government. Some 3 or 4 months later, they weren't happy with the provisional government because they were kind of concentrating too much control within their government again. So like, okay, we're not happy with you, we're going to overthrow you. And the person that actually led that revolution is this guy named Lenin. What we see from here is this is where they start to move into communism. So from there, they actually went into their civil war with Lenin as the head of the Red Party, which is basically the Communist Party, against others who didn't want to enforce communism. Long story short, the communists won out. And what we see from there is that we went into the Cold War once they kind of established that communist state, and that led to, of course, the dissolution of the Soviet Union by Mikhail Gorbachev, and this kind of led more into democracy. And what we actually do see, though, is because the USSR hasn't actually been dissolved for that long. It's only been like since the 70s. They're kind of struggling to set up a democracy. So the first president of their democratic state was Yeltsin. This led into Putin, and then switched to this guy named Medved, who we've extensively tried to pronounce his name up until this point, and then it went back to Putin. The interesting thing about that, though, is that what we actually see is that since Putin became president, this is back in the 90s, he technically hasn't left leadership, and the reason for that is because people see Medved is more of his puppet, right? So Medved became president, but Putin was actually his prime minister. So a lot of people speculate that they either had some kind of agreement or whatever, but Medved seems to just be doing whatever Putin tells him to do anyway. So by the time Putin runs for re-election, he's pretty much going to have been in power for about a quarter of a century. So to move on to the current leadership, since we're already kind of talking about Putin, Russia is a semi-presidential system, and how this is different from other presidential or semi-presidential systems is that there's a president and a prime minister, right? Typically, the prime minister is supposed to have more power than the president. In this case, it's the reverse. This actually isn't really Putin's fault because it actually started with Yeltsin. He made it in the Russian constitution that the president has the most power because what was happening was when he was trying to get the economy back up after having been under communism for so long and having had fallen, he needed the power to actually overrule like all the other politicians involved because they were trying to block his economic reforms. So this actually isn't Putin's fault, but he actually is granted the power that he has through the Russian constitution itself. And that's why we actually see there's a lot of weak institutions in Russia too, and a lot of really weak social programs. It's not really helping them, but at the same time, just trying to give them credit, they've only been a democratic state for less than a century. So to go over some information about Putin, according to Cases in Comparative Politics by Patrick O'Neill, he was born in St. Petersburg in 1952, and he actually studied law in that city. He was interested in joining the security services since a very young age, and he actually joined the KGB, which is their basically equivalent of the CIA. Once he graduated, he became deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, and then he became Yeltsin, the first president's prime minister. And then from there, he became president and prime minister again and president again. And fun facts, he actually did win the Nobel Peace Prize. And, he was nominated for it, but not won that. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2014 because he actually convinced the president of Syria to give over his nuclear weapons. Not nuclear weapons, his chemical weapons, which he used on the Syrian people. Do you guys remember what happened with that? Does anyone know what happened with that? Okay, so it's kind of explained, in Syria there's been a civil war going on, and the president, actually the government, used chemical weapons on people that were rebelling against the government, to include just innocent bystanders, women and children. So he actually spoke to President Assad and kind of said, you need to give up your chemical weapons to the international community. That's what they're asking for, just do it. But again, what's interesting is, as I've already mentioned, they actually are a weapons dealer, and that's one of their main exports. So technically, Syria did get their nuclear and chemical weapons from Russia, and now he's kind of asking them to give it back. So it's kind of like people are like, it's kind of hypocritical, but whatever. So to go into some current events, because I'm not sure a lot of people know what happened here, two things I want to talk about today, Syria and Crimea. So kind of went over the Syria thing, and so what we actually do see is that Russia and Syria kind of have a relationship. The reason is that their presidents, Assad and Putin, are actually friends. So we do speculate that Russia was the one that gave them the chemical weapons in the first place, but he did actually ask them to kind of stop using it. And what we actually see is that it's been the only effective thing. Like the U.S. is starting to actually, send troops over there, do airstrikes there. They still didn't listen. They only listened when Putin actually told them, hey, you need to stop it. So we actually have made progress in that sense with Syria. Something I really want to go over is Crimea. Do you guys know what happened with Crimea a year or two ago? No one's not? Okay, no one really knows. So to kind of go over that, and I'm actually quoting the Colbert Report here, but according to Answer Public Policy Center, it actually is one of the most reliable news sources in America, which is sad because one, is over, and two, it's supposed to be like fake politics, but whatever. So to go over some history, since like the 1400s, it's actually had various rulers, but eventually in 1774, Russia actually conquered Crimea, and they had rule over Crimea until like the 1900s. So for about 2 centuries, Crimea actually belonged to Russia, and it was only after like Nikita Khrushchev, a politician in Russia, gifted Crimea to the Ukraine that Crimea belonged to the Ukraine. And so Crimea's here, Russia's here, here's the Ukraine, but Russia actually had control of Crimea for a really long time. What actually happened was that the Ukraine had a civil war going on too, because the head of the Ukraine wanted to be allied and kind of follow the policies of Russia. But some people within the Ukraine are like, no, we really don't like that guy, we don't like Russia's policies, we don't want to do that. And so there's kind of like a war going on between these two groups. Meanwhile, Crimea actually has a very large Russian population, so they kind of wanted to side with Russia. And so what Putin is kind of, his justification for going and actually taking Crimea back and annexing it back to Russia was that there's a large population within Crimea that wants to be part of Russia, so we need to protect them. The only problem with this is that there actually is a 1994 sort of security assurance called the Budapest Memorandum of Security Assurance, in which Russia actually signed an agreement that they would never use any sort of like force or threat of force against the sovereignty and autonomy of Ukraine. And of course they violated that because they went through the Ukraine to reclaim Crimea. And so this also is technically a violation of international law, but currently as it stands, Crimea is now a part of Russia as a result of that. So I went over a little bit of the history of Russia, some of the basic facts about Russia, as well as some of the current issues about Russia. And I hope we're just a little bit more informed about this place because, one, their leader is kind of a rising power in the world, and two, they're actually a really huge power in the international community. They sit on the Security Council. They're one of the few members of the UN who are actually allowed to hold nuclear weapons. So it's kind of a good idea that we pay attention to them, especially since they harbor such, or their leader harbors such great, anti-Western sentiments. Thank you.